Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about some of the debuts that I read this year. I read quite a few new releases this year, and I don't typically keep up with those, but for some reason this year I just really took off with reading 2023 releases, and some of those releases were debuts, so I want to talk about those because I particularly love reading debut novels. I think there's a certain charm to them to read the first story that author got out into the world. And although I didn't love all of these, I do think they're worth mentioning. I think it's a very impressive feat for an author to get a book out into the world. And I do have a pretty good variety of debuts here, so let's get right into it, starting off with Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. This is a supernatural horror story about a girl who is having these dreams, these nightmares that are gradually interfering with her life, not just in that she's having nightmares, in that she's starting to bring things back from her nightmares. Things from her dreams are crossing over into her waking world, and she's not really sure what it means, but she knows it's something bad. So she goes back to her family and seeks their help. There's a lot of themes about family and grief and this kind of understated supernatural horror where the whole time you know something bad's coming. It's just kind of looming in the background of the story the whole time. But as our main character is trying to figure out what's going on, we're also learning about what this could be, what it could mean, and what the potential harm of it is. And I liked that there was some balance between these horror elements that were coming through, these kind of scary situations that she was finding herself in as things got worse and worse. But it's balanced with these quiet moments that she's spending with her family, and you really get to see the bond between them and learn a bit more about their culture. And they have to figure out what's going on and then find a way to stop this very ominous thing that's coming for them. I really liked this. I thought this was a very interesting type of horror, not only just all of the family and cultural elements that were put in this story, but just the fact that it wasn't very in your face with these horror elements, that there was something dark and scary going on in the story without it needing to be in your face and gruesome. I really appreciated that. I think that's a very difficult thing to create, that tone, that something is there, something is coming, while maintaining it and keeping a balance with all of these more mundane things that are happening in the story of just day-to-day life. Next up, I have Lies We Sing to the Sea by Sarah Underwood. This was one that really wasn't for me. It's a young adult romance. There's a love triangle. All three of those things are things that I don't really enjoy. So just the basis of the story was never going to work for me, I don't think. This is a story inspired by the Odyssey. It's not a retelling. It's based on a particular scene from the Odyssey. It is the story of this girl who lives on an island, and every year they have to sacrifice 12 maidens to appease Poseidon and keep their island safe. This girl is one of those maidens who is hung, except instead of dying, she wakes up on an island. There is another girl there, and she begins training her to kind of infiltrate the palace, and they think they have a way to end this sacrifice that they have to make every year. So I think for me, I went into the story expecting one thing. It was pitched as an Odyssey retelling, but with a female character, which was fine, but that's really not what this story is at all. It's very focused, takes place in one place. You really go from the island where she wakes up back to her home, and that's pretty much it. So it's not this grand adventure story. It's more trying to figure out the curse and the backstory of this place and how to resolve what's going on. And it also, just for my taste, read a little too young for me. So if you're in that age range or just like reading in that age range, I think this might be worth checking out for you. But young adult love triangles just aren't my thing. Next, I have The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekhara. This is an urban fantasy. It follows a character who was raised to kill his father, and now older, he's kind of dealing with that. He's moved to the city. He's gotten away from that environment and that life, and he's just trying to get used to this new place and situate himself in a new life. Within the city, there is a revolution that is forming, and there are also these mysterious bright doors that are portals to somewhere. and we just go around with our main character and kind of figure out the city, this place, figure out the mystery behind these bright doors. I don't tend to love urban fantasies. I just don't usually like that setting except in specific circumstances, and this wasn't really one of them. I enjoyed the story. I think it had a lot of interesting elements, but just overall it didn't really capture me the way that I had hoped that it would. But I think if you are more into urban fantasy than I am, this is one that's worth checking out. I think it's a very unique setting and definitely has some interesting elements with the main character. But again, for me, this one just wasn't really in my wheelhouse, and I didn't really connect with it as much as I had hoped that I would. Next up, one story that I really loved was Morgan is My Name by Sophie Keach. This is an Arthurian retelling focusing on Morgan, particularly her early life, her growing up and how Uther became her stepfather, her romance, discovering magic, and her love of healing and all those things. I really like the character of Morgan. I like Arthurian retellings, and I've always thought she's a really interesting character, but she's usually just a side character, and half of the time she's an evil side character. So I thought it was really cool to see a story focusing on her and her early years before she was potentially considered a villain or dangerous, before she had this great power. She's really figuring herself out, figuring out her place, and discovering magic. I just thought it was really well written. This was a very engaging story for me. I liked following Morgan through her life. I liked the way that things played out for her. Sometimes things kind of just happened and you don't always get the happy ending. She went through some difficulties in her early years as she's trying to find her place as a woman in this world. And I just thought this was a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll see more from Sophie Keach in the future. I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for anything else that she potentially publishes. But until then, this was one of my favorite things that I read this year. Next up, I have Breaking Day by Adam Oyebanji. This is a sci-fi story about an engineer in training who lives on a spaceship, and they are on their way to this planet where they're going to settle. They're almost there. They're almost at the end of their journey, and one day he looks outside the spaceship and sees a girl out there. She doesn't have a spacesuit on, but she's alive, and he has no idea who she is, why, or how she's out there. And he goes through with his friends trying to figure out who she is, if he was just hallucinating or if she's real, and if so, what is she doing there? And they also have to do this before they reach their destination, because then they'll be landing and it'll be too late. I liked this. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed the setup of the story, the premise of it, the mystery of the girl. I felt like it took a while for the mystery to really take off and us to get into the investigation. And then once things kicked off, things really snowballed and just got progressively more interesting, learning more and more about this girl and what's going on. So I think the mystery of something like that happening was very interesting. The setting of just being on a ship with no one else around, no one that they can communicate with, and not knowing where this person came from is very interesting. So this was an interesting sci-fi mystery. Next up, I have The Library of Shadows by Rachel Moore. This is a young adult paranormal romance, which I don't know why this appealed to me so much, because not my age range, not my genre, but I was really intrigued by this story and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. This is about a girl who goes to this boarding school, and it's where her father went to school. Her father has since passed away, and she's very interested in learning about his early life and figuring out more about him and who he was. So while she's at this school, she's trying to figure those things out about him, and ends up discovering that there are ghosts at this school. It's kind of strange and mysterious why this one particular ghost she meets leads her to find that there are other ghosts at the school. They seem to be drawn to this library, and she's trying to figure out why they're all there, why they all seem like they're stuck there, while also trying to figure out things about her father and why he got kicked out of that school. So there's a little bit of a mystery. It's not really a spooky story, but some of those spooky elements with all of the ghosts and things like that, the things surrounding why they're there. And it also just plays out like a rom-com. There's definitely romantic elements throughout the story, but it's a little bit goofy because our love interest is a ghost. But I just thought this story was a lot of fun. I liked the academic setting. I liked the mystery within it. I liked the interactions between the characters, some of the themes that were dealt with. The main character is dealing with the grief of the loss of her father that she still carries a little bit with her, and her befriending not only her roommate and classmates, but also these ghosts at the school. I just thought this was a good story, one that I wasn't expecting too much from, but I really had a lot of fun with. And the last book I want to talk about is The Princess of Thornwood Drive by Kalia Moreau. This is half contemporary, half fantasy. It follows two sisters. In the older of the two sisters' realities, she's living in the contemporary world, and a year before the story starts, her parents were killed in an accident that left her younger sister mostly paralyzed and nonverbal. She does have some movement still, but she has a lot of difficulty walking, and she only says a few things that don't make any sense. She's working as a barista and teaching horseback riding lessons, the older sister, and just trying to make ends meet, but really struggling to provide the medical care that her sister needs round the clock, while also just keeping the bills paid. Her younger sister, on the other hand, has no idea that there was ever an accident, because in her reality, she's living in a fantasy world. In her world, her and her sister are princesses, and their parents were attacked and kidnapped a year prior, and she was cursed, which is why she can't communicate the way that she should be able to. She's living in this world where there is magic and some sort of danger coming, whoever took their parents. So they're living in these very different realities, but I really liked the bond between the sisters. You can definitely tell between their two perspectives, even though they can't really directly interact the way that they're both just trying to care for one another. It's kind of a difficult situation for the older sister, where maybe the best case for her younger sister is to not be the caretaker for her full time, but to give that up. She feels very guilty about not being able to provide for her sister herself. And then in the younger sister, she's trying to protect her older sister from whatever this villain is in her world. So I thought it was very interesting to go back and forth between these two. The plot progresses as you go back and forth, even though they seem like they should be very separate realities. The story definitely flows between the two. You're just seeing it through a contemporary or a fantasy lens, depending what sister's perspective we're in. I think the way that these two genres were blended together was very well done. I loved the bond of the sisters. Overall, I thought this was a very interesting story. So those are all of the debuts that came out in 2023 that I read. I may not have loved all of them, but I am glad I read them all. I really like reading from new authors and hearing new narrative voices, getting specific takes on different themes that I like to see in stories, trying out some new genres and subgenres that I don't normally read. I still like doing that, even though I know they usually don't work for me. Sometimes they do, so I still like dipping my toes in them. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if you read any other debuts that came out in 2023. That's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.